Hi, everybody. Welcome to a new edition of Let's Talk About Education with Antonio Corrales. As you may know, I'm an educator, an entrepreneur, and a professor at the University of Houston Clear Lake. My main goal is to introduce you to pioneers in the field of education and to let you know about topics that you may be aware of, but you may be interested in. Today, we have the honor to have with us Holly Leroy. She's a seasoned educator, administrator, and she's going to talk to us today about how to deal with bullying and suicide in secondary school. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
I'm excited.
It's been a long, cold, lonely winter. Little darling, it feels like years since it's been here. Here comes the sun.
All right, Holly, why don't we start by allowing you to introduce yourself to the audience and kind of let them know, how do you get to where you are in your career?
Well, I've been an educator for 26 years, and I have spent most of my time with 5th grade through 12th grade.
Okay.
As an administrator, 5th and 6th grade, and then most recently 5 years with a 9 through 12 at the high school in Texas City High School.
That's
So,
really
my first experience was special education, so a special education teacher.
That's interesting. Now, a hot topic out there and a topic that you have become an expert. You're working on publishing a paper on this area, which is bullying in schools and suicide in schools. So let's start by defining it based on your experience and practical experience. How would you define bullying in secondary schools, and how would you combat it?
Okay, well, first of all, bullying is sometimes misunderstood.
Okay.
We get a lot of phone calls about conflicts.
Mm-hmm.
The kids are having arguments together.
Mm-hmm.
But bullying is when it's an unwanted, aggressive behavior.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes can be a one-time event or can be multiple events. And it's also, the big key to it is the imbalance of power.
Okay.
So where someone feels harassed or tormented and uncomfortable and unsafe.
And let me ask you something, a follow-up question there. So do you have to, because I think a key point that you hit is that is a misperception in regards to the concept. And I guess as a school administrator, for the school administrators who are looking at us right now, around the world, how do you establish that definition? Do you have to train parents and staff to kind of make clear, okay, this is what bullying means, and the other accusations may be, consider assault or maybe consider an infraction, but not necessarily bullying.
Correct.
Right?
Well, and I think before you can decide that, you have to get to the root of the problem.
Okay.
So why are the students receiving it? Why are the kids having a conflict first, if
Okay.
it's a conflict?
Okay.
Why is it a boyfriend-girlfriend issue?
Mhm.
It's a bad breakup? Is it mean girl situation?
Mhm.
Then you can isolate, okay, is it bullying or is it
Mhm.
truly conflict? And then you still have to deal with it regardless.
Exactly.
So even if you have a conflict, you have to deal with it. But with bullying, you can establish stay-away agreements. You can try to work with the two parties to see if they can work things out and if they can resolve their differences.
But I guess because it's a national debate, why is it so important for you as an administrator to clearly define bullying?
Oh, definitely, because there's been a lot of national press about David's Law, and it's very, very crucial to us that we understand that bullying is no longer during the school day. I mean, it is in the school day, but it also happens at night. It's 24/7.
Exactly, with cyberbullying and all that.
Yes, because the bullying that we probably were used to as kids is not as typical of what these kids are dealing with. They're dealing with more cyberbullying than bullying, but we still have bullying cases, and you have to take each one and digest it to figure out how can we solve this, how can we
Exactly.
work it, how can we fix it.
So clearly defining bullying. And so let's talk about a little bit about, before you talk about how to combat it, how to fight it. What about cyberbullying? How do you, during the school day, especially what you're saying, sometimes the students can be bullied, cyberbullied after school or at night, and then the next day they go to school, but you and your staff are the one who has to deal with all these issues.
Oh.
What about cyberbullying as a factor in your school or in secondary schools?
Well, I think cyberbullying in secondary schools is probably a daily routine because our kids are glued to their phones. And so even though you think they're not using their phone during the class, they're probably still seeing text message flash through. And so the cyberbullying can occur nonstop all day long. And at night, some kids don't even sleep because of the harassment they receive. So you really have to, number one, get kids to understand that it's okay to speak up and say, hey, is this right? I mean, this kid, I don't even know this kid, and he's harassing me on the internet. What can I do? Get help. We have an anonymous P3 application that they can do on their phone, and they basically can anonymously tell us who's bullying them or cyberbullying that's occurring.
Even if it's somebody that they don't know.
Yes, yes, because they may not even be at our school. But with the cyberbullying, if we can figure out who it is, we can pull in the other kid, we can work with them, we can look at their cell phone and talk about these issues and try to stop the cyberbullying. But I think as parents, you really have to look at what's going on your kid's cell phone. I mean, you pay for the phone.
Exactly. Sometimes, yeah, that's a big point that you're mentioning there, because sometimes I feel that, because I guess the students are becoming little adults and they have these big bodies, but they're still being children, and I think sometimes parents have too much respect for what is in their phone, and they may lose track of what's going on in their life.
Right. Probably the best parents that I have right now are active or friends on their Instagrams. They're watching their Snapchat. They keep an eye on what's happening with their friends, because sometimes our teenagers don't understand what can be cyberbullying or what's just typical. They just brush it off, and then it can eventually lead
So what
to
do you
worse
do? That's a
things.
great point. What do you do to, especially freshmen or kids who are still immature but they're still in high school? What do you do to explain to them, okay, this is not okay, or this is the bottom line between being funny or being bullying or being harassed? Because for some of those kids may not understand, and even parents may not understand.
Right.
So what do you do to kind of make that clear?
Well, at the beginning of the year, we meet with each class in small groups. So especially the freshmen, we work on what's the difference between teasing and what does teasing lead to. So we talk about how serious it is that just name calling can lead to something so much more, and that name calling can be bullying. And so we work with them on educating them on it's not okay to deal with that, and it's okay to speak up so that we can help you with the situation. And so what we've created on our campus is an anti-bullying club, and so these students are becoming bystanders and upstanders and saying it's not okay, you can't do that in our
So
classroom.
you create that dialogue,
Yes.
and so the kids are able to express their feelings about it. Okay, this doesn't make me feel good, or this makes me feel okay. And,
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And it helps when older kids say, no, that's not right, you shouldn't put up with that. That's,
so you kind of do an indirect peer mediation in
Yes.
there too. Okay.
yes,
Yeah.
the kids really help, especially with we have like 200 member club.
Oh,
And
okay.
so they call it sting out bullying.
Okay.
So they just really want kids to know that they need to be safe on campus.
And the same strategies that you apply for cyberbullying are applicable to regular bullying in school, or are they a little different?
They're a little different. Sometimes I would say we see more cyberbullying, but we do have bullying cases as well. Bullying is more face-to-face, you can see it. That's bullying to me is where you can just directly see what's happening. It's visible, it's accountable. Cyberbullying, sometimes you can't trace it.
Correct.
You don't know who is doing it because they're
Correct.
using an internet-based website.
And now with those bring your own device policies that students are able to use their phone in the classroom, it makes it more difficult for staff and administrators to monitor that, right?
Yes, exactly.
So I think the key point that you're saying, and I think it resonates with me a lot, and probably with everybody out there, is having those dialogues with students, clearly explaining, what is bullying, what is not, and how the other people feel. But it has to be a constant basis. What about the role of counselors in schools, though? I mean, because sometimes that's a hot topic in itself, because there's always a dispute between administrators and counselors in terms of what is their role. Do they have too much administrative role, or are they doing counseling? And see, how do you see it as a seasoned high school principal, that role that the school counselors may have in secondary schools?
Well, I would say that administrators work very closely with the counselors.
Okay.
Because there's many times where an administrator and a counselor are working together on a case to see if they can, number one, help the student or the victim, or most of the time the bullier is facing a lot of self-esteem issues anyway, so we have to work on that person as well. So we work on the victim and the bully. So, and then you need your assistant principal to help with the discipline when they find the correction that's needed.
Correct.
So they do work together.
Now, what would you recommend to educators or their administrators in secondary education to establish effective systems to combat bullying in their schools?
Okay, well, first of all, you have to have an anonymous way to report.
Okay.
Any type of electronic system is great because they can get on their cell phones and they can just type it in, and then you have to have a system of who receives it and to make sure that they're accountable for investigating each one of those.
Having like a follow-up after they not only denounce it, but making sure that somebody follow-ups to the denounce.
Yes. And there's a lot of reporting, like if every time there's a stay-away agreement because they found bullying, then that's sent to all the administrators and counselors. And then we follow up to say, how's it going with that kid? And then everybody knows those two kids have issues, so we need to watch these two kids. So it helps
having that
us.
system in place, so reporting and follow-up. Okay. What else do you think that we can do? Having that reporting system, having a follow-up. What about training then?
Oh, definitely. You have to have social and emotional learning in your schools. And we have started a methods of academic performance success for freshmen.
Okay.
And so it talks about self-esteem, how to deal with a bully, how to deal with your friends. Because a lot of these issues are based on friendships that went bad or relationships that went bad, and it just turns into the worst case scenario when it really could be handled if they understood how to communicate with each other. Okay. And so really the social emotional learning helps them learn how to communicate and deal with that teenage life they're dealing with.
What about what you were mentioning before about the dialogues and the having those conferences with students? How often do you recommend it to have those, especially considering that the dynamic on a high school, that you have blogs, you have 1,000, 2,000 students, 3,000 students in a campus. How often are those dialogues possible, especially from administrators, counselors, and staff?
I would say that it's been very overwhelming on my administrators and counselors because we have been nonstop counseling and behind closed doors with kids trying to work on.
For being proactive.
Yes, to be proactive. So we can't afford for one kid to get missed.
Exactly.
So if there's an issue or a situation, we're really focusing on how can we resolve it? Can it be resolved? Or do we have to go to stay-away agreements? And do we have to monitor? And of course, the discipline, sometimes there's tickets issued. So
so making it a priority for
yes.
Because I think for some folks, there's still a lot of misperceptions, and that these kind of lead me to the other topic, because I think sadly there's still administrators and educators out there that still don't understand the level of importance of bullying and being aware of bullying, because they feel that there are other items in their list, in their checklist, before dealing with this issue. And when this issue can lead to suicide,
yes.
which research shows that there's a strong relationship between presence of bullying in schools and the possibility of students committing suicide, then is when people try to react and then being proactive. And so my question is that how do you, sadly this is a hot topic, which is suicide in schools, but it's a reality, it happens. So what do you recommend for administrators out there who somehow may experience this horrible tragedy of having a student who committed suicide because of bullying or alleged bullying? What do you recommend them to do to deal with that situation?
Well, I will tell you, after our past year with 2 suicides, it totally transformed my leadership. It changed the way I lead our campus. And I would say every administrator and counselor has been changed, and teachers on campus, as well as the students.
In what way?
Well, you change the way you do things. I mean, now I look at if kids are unhappy or having issues with bullying, okay, that's more important right now than their academics because they can't think.
It went to the top of the
Yes,
list.
it went to the top of the list because actually our kids cannot think in an academic setting when they're being tormented on a cell phone or on the internet. They're thinking about their next move or who do they have to avoid in the hallway. So if they can't be safe, then they can't learn. So it's really important to us that they feel safe. And so that takes a lot of work for each case.
So what do you recommend to those watching us today to do when they facing such a terrible thing, especially based on your experience? What are the steps that you think that they should take to deal with such a thing of suicide in school?
Well, I would definitely recommend that your counselors are trained in how to deal with post-suicide interventions. And we've actually trained our staff and our administrators on how to deal the after effects of suicide. It really makes you realize that every comment that a kid has, you may think it's trivial, but each comment or each outcry has to be addressed. And you really have to make sure that kid is okay. And then there's proper protocols to go through to make sure they may need to go see the mental health deputy. They may need therapy. So there's a lot of procedures you need to go through with each outcry.
Did you guys develop like a manual for for steps to take, or is something that you already have done so many times that you already know by heart? Is if a kid talks about taking his or her life, we basically need to follow this protocol.
There are there's books provided by the state that are about post-intervention and pre-intervention for suicide, and it basically can walk you through it. And I think after 2 of them, both were very different, but they taught me a great deal about what you need to do. But it's very important that as soon as you learn the news of the suicide, get as many details as you can, and you need to decide, when did the kids find out? Have they already found out? How am I going to tell the kids? Your first thought is that child was in a classroom 8 periods a day. So there's going to be an empty seat in 8 periods a day. And so how are you going to tell those classmates each period throughout the day? And how are you going to deal with the teachers who are broken down from the student? And
I was going to ask you that. So let's go stage by stage. How do you deal with the staff? Let's start with the staff.
Well, if you're lucky enough and it occurs, I don't want to say lucky enough, but if it occurs off campus, you have a little bit of time to prepare before the kids come in the next day. And
because you have a little more time to think and think how to address the entire, because it's an event that impacts the entire educational community. And teachers may get depressed, may get anxiety. It's a combination of the impact could be huge.
Yes, and in hindsight, in a situation where it happened the night before, brought all the staff in, it's real important to get them in before the kids get there. And when you're telling the staff, you need to make sure that you've already pulled those teachers that know the kid, or even previous years that knew the kid.
So having those individual conversations prior, having the entire stuff.
Oh, definitely. Because when you tell the whole group, you don't know how one teacher's going to take it versus another. And then you could, just like the kids, when you tell the kids, one kid could be a best friend. And if you haven't pulled the best friend, then the whole class is going to break down.
The whole reaction is different.
Yes.
So that's a really good tip. Now, what about parents, though?
Parents are, devastated at this time, and so.
How do you deal with other parents? Because we know, I'm a parent. You're a mother. We do know that the communication goes really fast nowadays.
Yes.
And people get into panic modes really fast.
Yes.
And it's like an epidemic. So how do you deal with parents? How do you communicate the event to parents and provide support to some of them that may be affected tremendously by this?
Okay.
besides the direct parents who are affected, of course, but I'm talking about the other parents who may have known the child,
Yes.
or just affected by the news in general.
Okay. Well, the first thing that I would advise is to get with your public relations director and make sure you compose a letter that's going to go out to all the parents, but make sure you have in that letter resources, websites that parents can go to, phone numbers they can contact at the school.
Like
if they
local
think-
communities too.
Yes, or signs of depression in case they think their child is going to react from the suicide. So if you have that information in the handout, and make sure it's in English and Spanish. That way you have both parents type of parents taken care of. If they have that information and they have a phone number they can call, I know that our phones were busy the next day, concerned over their kids. And so...
And do you have like personnel at that point with a specific script trying to talk to the parents and kind of communicate what happened, right?
Yes, of course the secretaries had certain scripts they had to go by, but they would...
And do you align that with your PR department or the communication?
Yes. Sometimes, or sometimes you
You
develop your own
have to
quickly.
develop your own quickly, exactly.
Yeah, it depends how quickly it happens.
How
and
quickly event happens.
sometimes as a principal, you're just going to write something as quickly as possible and let the secretaries know, if parents are still distraught, get them to an administrator to talk to them, to ease their mind or talk to them about their situation.
What about the other students? How do you deal with this? How do you communicate it to students? How do you deal with that part?
I would say that's probably the most devastating part to do or handle is communicating to students. So it would be my advice to round up your best counselors. If you're in secondary, try to find secondary counselors to come support your school. We were lucky. We had Gulf Coast Center come in, UTMB helped us out. So we had lots of counselors on staff to help. And I would do small groups.
So you were like sending those counselors to all the classroom
Yes.
to classroom?
Yes, we tried to send, first of all, if a kid is involved in a certain activity, let's say maybe the kid's on the football team. Well, we're going to start with the football team first because they spend the most time with them. So we will handle the football team differently than we'll handle those 8 classes.
Exactly.
And then we always open up like a crisis center for kids that the teachers know that if they ask to go and get help, to send them in a pair, and then they come down to our crisis center to get the beginning stages of counseling. And then the counselors decide, okay, I need to move this into a private setting, or this can be handled in this setting. So because you don't want to cause more devastation in the
Gotcha.
crowd or panic.
Gotcha. When
so-
somebody's more affected than others, or whatever. Okay.
Yes.
Okay, but now what about dealing with the media? Because that's one of the biggest fear from administrators when they have to, deal with these tragedies, and some of them haven't been trained, or they don't want to say the wrong thing, they don't want to be misperceived, and they also upset. How do you deal with the media? And not only the day that happened, but the following days.
Well, and typically the media will have already talked to the family because, the schools are not usually the ones that will put out the story because we want to protect the family and their story. And so usually the family will put out their story. And so you have to understand families are devastated at this point. So unfortunately with cyberbullying, there's going to be a lot of fingers pointed just because everybody's frustrated and devastated that, a child has been lost. And so sometimes dealing with media, you need to make sure that you're ready to talk to the media, and you have to get it cleared with your administration office. I chose not to speak out. Was questioned several times to be interviewed by CNN once and other news stations, but it was devastating alone as a principal to deal with the loss of a child on campus. So I knew I was not ready to talk about it because I was healing just like the teachers were, and I was protecting my kids and trying to.
Well, and you were the face of the school, and you didn't wanna, you need to, well, like you're saying, you need to protect your entire educational community.
Yes, and we were grieving. We were grieving over the loss, and
Correct.
it probably would have been very difficult to
Mhm.
answer some of those questions that they probably had.
Correct. So basically, not feel obligated to talk to the media if you're not ready as an
Yes.
administrator.
Yes.
What about, do you eventually develop like a media plan or with your communication department in the district to kind of address concerns? I'm sure that you guys develop a statement
Yes.
and all that process, right?
Yes, I usually, with any type of situation, especially with both of these, we did like a crisis response team, and that's usually my counselors, my administrators. We get around the table, we ask the media person to come over from our district, and then we brainstorm. We usually have an officer in the room, so we kind of have as many parties as needed to brainstorm how can we roll this out effectively to minimize the devastation to the kids.
Absolutely.
You know, how are we going to let them know
Yeah.
without causing just hysteria on
Yeah.
the campus? Or you don't want kids to glamorize the event, and that's what we
Which
faced.
is also another risk, right?
Yes. Oh, it's that was the
And
most.
it's a risk that people may not know that is there, but it's there.
And if you don't know,
Can
the
you
sim-
elaborate on that? What do you
Sure.
mean by glamorizing the event?
Well, the media takes a hold of it and, you know, shows the beautiful pictures of the young ladies that committed suicide. And as teenagers, it's just, they love the fact that they're on TV. And it's so sad, but I had a student that just came to the counselor and said, well, I'm just so in awe with what this young lady did. And, you know, the counselor said, well, why? And because she's like a star now, and she can move on and be happy. And of course,
So the wrong message can be sent if the statement or the message is not well developed.
Yes.
That especially when kids are in that process of becoming adults.
Right.
Kind of what is the, understand that this is a tragedy. This is not a publicity
Right.
event or anything like that. Well, there's a lot of shows out there. I don't want to name it, but there's a lot of shows out there that may portray suicide as a good thing,
Yes.
and it's a terrible thing.
Yes, and that's what we were kind of dealing with, is our kids were watching a series,
Mhm.
and it glamorized suicide.
Yeah.
And they kind of saw it as a way out.
Mhm.
And it was an easy way out for them, I think, when they saw that. And then they also saw the glamour involved in it.
Mhm.
And they thought it was a way to be famous. They just want to be on TV.
Yeah,
And that's not the way to be on TV.
Yeah.
It's surreal.
Yeah. So there's a lot of education process in there dealing, and so it tells us that it's really important to have that communication plan really
Yes.
well developed to make sure that everybody is on the same page, and also the community, kind of making clear the options that the community have to receive help,
Right.
especially in counseling and
Yes.
psychological help. Well, I really want to thank you for taking that. I know this is a really difficult topic for you, but I think it's an important topic because there's a lot of administrators out there that sadly may be facing a similar situation, and it's important for them to know, what to do. Because I'm sure that for you it was a big learning curve the first time and the second time, and so it's never a pleasant thing, but it's also it could definitely help, especially what you mentioned at the beginning. If you're proactive with bullying and addressing, having follow-up systems, and it can help you diminishing. Research says that if you're proactive with bullying, suicide rates are gonna go down. And so I really thank you for all your work.
Thank you.
For taking the time to be with us, folks out there. Remember that we have this interview and many others on Antonio Corrales' YouTube channel. We have an Sterling Evaluation and Assessment. And please help somebody today. See you next time. Stay tuned.